Of the Business Economy and Innovation Committee. I'm Councillor James Lewis, and I'm chair of the meeting. A couple of quick housekeeping things. Please, can you sit behind the plate with your name on? This is so the webcast makes sure everybody is correctly labelled. Thank you. It's a technical issue, and this meeting will be webcast, and welcome to anybody watching online. I'm going to turn to the agenda now, and the first item is apologies for absence. Miles, do you have any apologies, please?
Apologies for absence have been received from Farah Butt, Councillor Michael Graham, Deb Hetherington, Councillor Peter Kilbane, Barney Minot, Dr Peter O'Brien, Richard Paxman, Paul Price, Mandy Ridyard, Councillor Alex Ross-Shaw, Bobby Thandy, Councillor Graham Turner and Neville Young.
Thank you, and we'll make sure those are recorded. On to the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of November, and first of all, just check with everybody that we're happy that it's a correct record of the meeting. That's great, thank you. If there's anything that we need to pick up from those minutes that's not elsewhere on the agenda, let me know now, please. No, that's great. I shall note those minutes as accurate. On to Chair's update and a couple of appointments to note. So first of all, it's Asma's first meeting as Deputy Chair of the committee, and I'm sure it'll be great moving forward. And secondly, it's I'd like to congratulate Sarah on becoming the permanent Head of Business Innovation and Inclusive Economy. So welcome Sarah to the role permanently. And next I shall move on to item 6, which is the economic update, and I'll ask Patrick to introduce this item, please.
That's great. Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you. So just run through sort of the key, quite a lot of information in the report covering the latest macroeconomic information and the latest local level information. So I'll quickly run through some of the key highlights and then happy to take questions. So just touching on where we are with inflation. Inflation rose unexpectedly by 0.1% in December. This follows a period of contraction in inflation since February. I wouldn't read too much into that. I think there are a range of factors that are driving that. Not least, I think, it's volatility on international markets at the moment and increased shipping costs. So the thing that seemed to be driving that increase, when you actually look at the different elements of it, was increased transportation costs that came out sort of quite strongly in the index. Other things within that, such as food inflation continues to fall quite strongly. So it's now at 8%, having fallen from 9.2% the previous month in November. So I think the fundamentals there and things like core inflation as well remains unchanged. But it's fair to say that the headline CPI rate has gone up ever so slightly, but that's really sort of a modest increase. If we sort of look at that sort of inflation rate for food, the contraction in headline inflation down to 8% is the 9th consecutive month that food inflation has continued to fall, and in many ways the kind of the downward sort of pressure on inflation, I think, is happening much more quickly than some of the economic forecasters were assuming. So, for instance, OBR and Bank of England were suggesting that inflation, particularly food inflation, would be at 10% going into 2024. So it is falling a little bit more quickly than OBR and Bank of England assumed. If we look at where we are with interest rates, since the committee last met, the Bank of England met recently in December, 13th of December, and at its meeting it voted to keep interest rates on hold at 5.25 basis points. The pattern of voting suggests that it was very similar to the meeting in September. So 6 members of the committee voted to keep interest rates on hold, and 3 were wanted to increase it by another 0.25 basis points. So I think they're very, very similar. If you look at the published minutes from the Bank of England, they are just concerned about the potential persistence, the domestic persistence of inflation, alongside the resilience of the wider economy, and that's also a theme. I think that view about inflation being domestically fueled also came out, I think, with the information that the OBR published around the autumn statement. So they published a range of information, and we touched on that briefly in the report as well. economic growth. What we know about economic growth relates to the Q3 growth numbers, and the first estimates of the Q3 GDP numbers suggest the economy contracted by 0.1% in that period. There are a number of different reasons to why that's happening. Broadly, most sectors are stagnant, manufacturing, construction, at a broad level. I think the interesting thing as well is we won't know what the actual position for 2023 is until February, when government publishes the full year's figures. Government does publish, and ONS does publish information on a monthly basis, and that is a bit volatile at the moment. So it suggested the economy was growing slightly in November and it contracted in December. So it growing slightly in October and contracted in November. So basically, I think the subtext of that is that as we ran up to Christmas, there was very little growth at all in the economy as such. And again, I think sort of the quarterly estimates suggest a number of different sort of sectoral components to that, but broadly, a relatively sort of flat growth in services. Broadly flat growth in construction, although within that some subsectors in construction, certainly in the third quarter, were doing quite well, such as transportation equipment and car manufacturing, which have picked up a little bit. Report also sort of just summarises some of the key economic messages from the OBI's autumn statement. So the Office of Budget Responsibility has a duty to assess the government's sort of autumn statement sort of proposals and sort of update its own economic forecasts. And there are some interesting messages that came out of their economic assessments. Compared to the last assessment that the OBR published, that they're assuming that the economy is going to grow much more slowly over the next 3 to 4 years than assumed in their last assessments. They also were of the opinion that the inflation would be more domestically fueled and would be more persistent. Their view is that they are unlikely to get near the 2% inflation target until sometime in 2025. They did a variety of work looking at the impact of the autumn statement. I don't want to dwell too much on that, but the other interesting things that are in the report is they looked at their position. They looked at the position in terms of UK labour market performance, and they do think that unemployment is going to peak higher, and that peak will last longer into 2025. Into mid-2025, they think the overall unemployment rate will peak up to 1.6% nationally, and then start to fall back. I think the other key message in terms of the takeaway from that is their perspective on living standards, as this is measured by real disposable household income, and their forecast suggests that that real household disposable income will be 3.5% lower in 2024-25 compared to the 2019 pre-pandemic level. And to put that into sort of some historical context, this represents the largest reduction in real living standards since the ONS started capturing this information in 1950. Just moving on slightly, a range of information in there around sort of local forecasts. So we've published some updated economic forecasts using our regional econometric model. That shows that we're forecasting that growth in West Yorkshire of this year of around about 0.6%. That's compared with 0.7% nationally. And also then reflecting on clearly what we are seeing in a lot of the regional data, and I think the REM forecasts actually sort of pick that one up, as a general deterioration in sort of economic performance. Not significant, but at the West Yorkshire level, and that parallels and mirrors what we're seeing nationally. So what does that mean? And some of the key headlines from that are: is business sentiment deteriorated in quarter 4 of 2023 in West Yorkshire, and we know that from the Chamber's quarterly economic survey. The recovery in net business startups that we saw pick up very strongly after the pandemic has certainly stalled. Growth in the employee count has stalled in recent months, as has growth in median pay. It's important to sort of point out this is also happening nationally, so this is not unique to the West Yorkshire economy. We are seeing a general loosening in the labour market, and it's worth saying as well that the unemployed claimant count is growing, although modestly at this rate, because the overall trend of, say, for instance, job posting, jobs vacancies is still quite high, still quite robust in sort of in a historical context. Mentioned there the sort of results from the Chamber's quarterly economic survey. That points out that respondents are probably more concerned about a general pattern of demand and growth in the economy at the moment. So a lot of respondents were fairly pessimistic about the overall level of domestic demand. export sales on balance were down, particularly for a number of sectors, and also including the service sector. And also, I think there's a range of sort of insights coming out of the survey around a sharp fall in hiring intent, particularly among manufacturing respondents. And I think that also sort of points to sort of the information that we published in the report as well from the West Yorkshire Business Survey. I won't dwell too much on that. That gives us much richer information from respondents, although it's a different type of survey and was conducted slightly earlier than the QES survey. I think one of the key takeaways from that is that a lot of businesses, both manufacturing and services, are particularly concerned about vacancies, hard to recruit vacancies, and gaps in their workforce skills at the moment. And some of the sort of leading indicators from that survey do make flag up that as a significant issue at the moment. There's a range of other information in there. I won't dwell too much on that, but hopefully those are sort of the key takeaways from that sort of economic overview. And I'll go back to the chair.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'll see if anybody on the board has got either any questions for Patrick on that presentation or any insights to add to the meeting, please. Asma, please.
Hi, thank you. Just after Christmas, we had an insolvency kind of a restructuring update, and Paul Mount, who's the Bank of England regional Yorkshire representative, was in attendance. I actually met Paul once before at the Yorkshire Asian Business Association event as well. And his forecasting was slightly different to when I met him in November to when I met him in January. I spoke to him after and spoke about West Yorkshire Combined Authority. They don't actually feed into directly with, other than their reports that are probably picked up. I wonder if there is scope, and he was very keen to pick up on a one-to-one in terms of the forecasting that they do, the leverage that's applied, what inflation looks like. I just wanted to know, is that something that we feed into when we're preparing the economic report and updates?
Yes, that's a very good question. Yes, we do. I do talk to Paul at least a couple of times a year, and we do share our information. So, for instance, the West Yorkshire Business Survey, we share those results with them. They get it confidentially ahead of us actually publishing it. They do share information with us. Obviously, we recognise the sort of the sensitivities of the information that they collect, and they can only share very sort of anecdotal insights with us, and it's not sort of information we can actually use in our reporting, but it does allow us to sense check some of the other information that we're getting. I hope that's sort of helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. Martin, please.
Yeah, I was just interested around the skills gaps and just the order of magnitude of that in terms of 4 out of 5 companies or organisations saying they've got gaps. And I just wondered whether there's more granularity that you could share with the team around that.
There is, yes, to a certain extent. They're attached to the
microphone on, please.
Sorry, my sincere apologies. You think? Yes, we can do that. So attached to the main report is a more detailed sort of summary of some of the results. So that contains a slide pack that's got more information for a number of industries and sectors with those hard to recruit skills gaps. But we can do more work on that. So we can do more information. But there is more information in that appendix. Yeah. So that's the appendix to item 6. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any more? Sarah, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this report. In Calderdale, we're just about to, we're in the process of refreshing our inclusive economic strategy and also our employment and skills framework. And this intelligence is helping to sort of inform the focus of those. And so thank you. It's really useful. And we welcome business awareness as well as the importance of reducing carbon emissions and working at a Calderdale level on the green economy via delivery of a climate action plan. I suppose I just wanted to note the importance of the SMEs and micro enterprise base, because obviously the mayor's, the mayoral council has focused on big business, and we understand the rationale for that work. But the economic analysis also tells us how important smaller businesses are. So just wanted to sort of note that really.
Yes, yes, it's my apology, Chair. Yes, yes, they are. They are incredibly important, and whilst the business survey does allow us to to pick them up. There are distinct differences between SMEs and micro businesses compared to the medium and larger businesses. That comes out very strongly. So yeah, and I think when we do the analysis on skills gaps as well, you'll see very different response. So yeah, so we will be doing more work, to sort of disseminate that so we can share that with the committee. Yeah.
Thank you. Sue, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested on page 16 in the trends in the net business startup rate, Patrick, and just wondered if you've got any insights into any patterns there, in particular startup sectors that are growing or ones that are not at the moment.
It seems to be pretty broad based at the moment. From when I had a look at the information, so we use a third party. It seems to be pretty broad based, and we use a sort of a third party data supply for that. So it seems to be pretty much across the board. It seems to be a general pattern of the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. Carl, please.
Thank you, Chair. Page 15, Patrick, it talks about the business sentiment, and export sales were down and possibly going to go down even further in the short term. What about the indications about where growth might come from in terms of business exports and the connection with that and our international trade work?
Yeah, I mean, we are, as part of the international trade work, we are doing some work on that, and I think my colleague sort of Thomas Purvis will sort of touch on that when we talk about sort of the human investment item later in the agenda. So we are doing work on that. I mean, I think in the moment, I think if you look at sort of what businesses are saying about domestic demand, it's a bit difficult to see where that growth's coming from. So clearly, we need to understand what's happening in those export markets. And I think some of the work that my colleague Guy Hermy will present on the economic evidence base does suggest there are particular manufacturing subsectors where we do have comparative and competitive advantage, and that's still showing up in the export sort of figures. So those manufacturing subsectors where we have comparative or significant competitive advantage, they tend to do better in export terms. So I think there's a link in between sort of the kind of ongoing monitoring work around sort of what which export markets we need to target versus some of the kind of analytical insights around some of those messages coming out of the economic evidence strategy.
Thank you. Pulvinder, please.
Thank you, Chair. Patrick, thanks for the report. Page 14, the section about the living standards. I just wonder, the 3.5% forecasted by the ONS, how does West Yorkshire compare?
I think it's fair to say probably it would probably trend slightly above that. We're not. I must. Sorry, I've done it again. I apologise sincerely. I would suggest it. third striking you out. Apologies. Yeah, I would suggest it's slightly more elevated in West Yorkshire. We know that sort of there are much more substantial issues around sort of real disposable income, real household disposable income. We know that there are. It's likely to be proportionately higher, not significantly higher in West Yorkshire. We would need to do some work on that. I think it's worth sort of saying that's work that OBR do themselves, so they do it separately. So it's their interpretation of a range of information produced by the Treasury, ONS, and the Bank of England. But we can replicate that OBR methodology because they do publish it, but it's without undertaking that work, it's likely to be either at a similar level or slightly higher in West Yorkshire.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to come in on this item, please? No, that's great. Thanks very much, Patrick. The recommendation in the report is to note the contents of the report, and we've done a very good job of that. Thank you, everybody. So with that, we'll move on to item 7. And Jo, I think you're going to introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so Guy is going to talk us through the economic assessment summary that was circulated in the briefing packs, and then I will talk through the wider work that's been going on the development of our new economic strategy, and then we'll take questions at the end of those 2 updates. And it's worth just saying at this point that at the March session of the committee, we're going to be having quite a deep dive on the economic strategy, because we will have all of the evidence collated at that point. So if there are any particular aspects of this update that you want us to interrogate further at a deep dive session, please do let us know, and we can prep for that for the March meeting. So I'll pass to Guy at this point, who's going to talk through those slides.
Good afternoon. So we have been gathering the evidence for the economic assessment, and I have some slides here with some of the key takeaways. The work is still ongoing, and there's more analysis done than the one that I'm going to share. But just to start, the overall view is that we have been looking at the economy at West Yorkshire, especially on productivity in the last 20 years, its performance over time, how it performs geographically within the region and compared with other regions, and the local specialisms, industrial specialisms, as Patrick was referring. So broadly speaking, we do observe that the economy is quite diversified, polycentric, so economic activity has a lot of specialisms in different areas that complement each other. However, since the financial crisis, productivity growth hasn't been able to converge with the national average as it was doing before the financial crisis. According to the forecasting that we have available, this productivity gap is expected to widen a little bit, not massively, but there's no projections of convergence as things go. And then we analyze sectorally how does our specialisms do with the national average, and we pretty much observe a trend for manufacturing that I'll go more specifically later on, and one for services, mostly in Leeds, but not only in Leeds. And a very important point is that we do observe that West Yorkshire is what we call a self-contained labour market, so most people that live in West Yorkshire work in West Yorkshire, and there are quite significant number of flows between boundaries, and less than half of that is people coming to Leeds. So we really see a role, polycentricity and dynamism between districts, which gives a lot of importance to a future role, for example, of transport. But how we spread opportunities quite dynamic today. So as I was saying, so the first thing we can observe is that West Yorkshire, as I said, economic performance in terms of productivity. So on this figure on the right, the purple bar, it's roughly 15% below the national average. And then when we see on the left, the pink bar, it's London, and it does very well and above the national average. Then we have other bars which are international peers. So we have Spain, Italy, France, and New York. And what we see is that London actually does very well like most of the other cities. There are differences. For example, Madrid doesn't overperform that much compared with the rest of Spain. But where we see a striking difference is how West Yorkshire, and this is not only West Yorkshire, other combined authorities, second-tier cities, this is becoming very important in the debate, do perform below the national average, while when we look at their peers internationally, so let's say Barcelona, Florence, other cities in the continent, they tend to perform roughly, give or take, within their domestic national average. This is an outlier that we have observed, and closing this gap would be almost 10 billion in 1 year alone. That's roughly £4,000 per resident. And as things go, and our forecasting would suggest that by 2042, that gap will widen almost to £6,000 per resident. So the size of the prize of converging and trying to close the productivity gap in the next decades, because historically we know this takes decades, the size of the prize is enormous. So we looked at the specialisms, and the specialisms that I'll mention in a second, they are mostly on manufacturing, and then what we call exportable services that we are able to sell to other parts of the country. We are picking these two groups because those are the ones where West Yorkshire has a massive productivity gap with the UK. So things like the foundational economy, hospitality, retail, healthcare, the productivity gap, it's not that large. Those are very important, especially on the inclusive part of things, but it's not there that we find the major productivity gaps. So that's why we'll focus on the specialisms. So the first thing we can see is that manufacturing, it's very, very large in West Yorkshire, 100,000 jobs. It's the highest manufacturing jobs per capita in a combined authority. capita is higher than West Midlands, for example. It's roughly 15% of the economy, 13.4. And the specialisms are diverse in terms of sectors and geographically. So we have textiles in Bradford, we do have glass manufacturing in Wakefield, furniture in Kirkley. So this gives a lot of resilience because as these are different sectors in different areas, we have agrochemicals as well. So this is a very positive thing. And then especially in Leeds, we do observe that most of their specialisms are on the service sector. Legal, finance, head office activities. So these definitions are a bit tricky to know, but we know, for example, computer programming, consultancy, and related activities, West Yorkshire, mostly in Leeds, has the highest number of jobs in combined authorities, as many jobs as Greater Manchester, which is a larger combined authority. So we do see some sectors being strong, but as I said, we do have a productivity gap. So when we zoom in these sectors, first at the left, we can see the manufacturing. So we do have a manufacturing gap in general, but it's not where we are specialized. For example, textile productivity, where we are very specialized, it's above UK average. And other sectors that we are somehow specialized, like food, wood materials, transport equipment, there's some productivity gap, but it's not massive. We do observe a productivity gap in petroleum, chemicals, and other minerals. This includes, of course, refining petroleum, but also things like pharma and electronics, optical, and electrical products. So pretty much where we observe a productivity gap is because West Yorkshire does different kind of activities compared with the rest of the UK. For example, agrochemicals against pharma, for example. It's not about not being very good on what we do, it's lacking some of these other sectors. Or, for example, doing electrical equipment against, let's say, microchips or something that is more complex. So on the manufacturing side, productivity can be improved in all sectors. It can overperform the UK average, but closing the gap really seems to be about being able to absorb new manufacturing industries within the region. On the right one, we look at Leeds and its specialisms, and the picture is a bit different. Even in the specialisms, with some range of differences, but Leeds underperformed the UK in terms of productivity, even in legal, head offices, telecommunication, finance, TV, and publishing. So if Leeds is the most specialized area on these services in West Yorkshire, and we do aim to go till the UK average as a whole, probably in these sectors we need to be doing above average. This can be improving existing firms, mixing different sectors, mixing digital and tech with some sectors, bringing new companies, expanding others. There's a lot of avenues for that, but it really seems to be building up on the existing service sectors where the gap is. And then this is a very, very important point. We are talking about productivity and closing the productivity gap, but the wage data suggests that closing the productivity gap alone will not translate into inclusive growth, because if you look at the chart, the further we go to the right, it's the highest income percentiles, and that's where we have the largest wage differences compared with the UK. So on percentile 10 and 20, our wages are around 4% lower than the UK average. We know there's minimum wage, so there's a floor, so the differences are not that massive within the lowest income. But attracting these highly productive sectors are more likely to close the highest wage gaps, which are around 11 to 12%. So this would bring new jobs, good jobs, people could take them, but this does not automatically translate into inclusive growth, and then there needs to be levers and things that need to be considered on that front. And on the productivity, we do identify over time two features that seem to explain the gap. The first is low investment. At the regional level, investment in West Yorkshire, it's one of the lowest or the lowest, depending how you consider the geographies too. And it hasn't been that way historically. So this is something West Yorkshire investment as a share of its economy has been fluctuating around the UK average until 2013-14, and then there's a divergence since then. Investment levels have been lower, and this is exactly the period where productivity starts diverging with the UK average. And we do know that UK in general already has, at international levels, a low level of investment. So it's lower in a basis that we think it's low. And it seems to be uniform across sectors and types of investments. IT, buildings, tangibles, intangibles, we see the underperformance constant, and the same across districts. And then we also have below average level of skills, especially population with qualification level 4 or above. And on this figure, we can see that the pipeline of skills, people that achieve level 2 by age 19, was doing massive progress. Roughly around the same time, we have a divergence in productivity, and then it starts diverging again with England, like the performance of the young. So the pipelines, we have a current underperformance in terms of skills, and the pipeline stopped doing the progress it was doing in the past. And then all these things combined, making the economy more dynamic, probably will make the economy even more integrated. So these are a travel to work area from the ONS. The latest one is still the census 2011. And what we can see from the figure is that there are 2 travel to work areas in West Yorkshire. One that is mostly around Bradford and the rest of the combined authority. This doesn't mean that this is fully self-constrained. People commute. We know there's a lot of commutes, for example, from Bradford to Leeds. But they are not as integrated as, for example, when we look at the map, we see Manchester and, for example, Liverpool. Their combined authorities and their travel to work areas seems to be more matched. So people flow and work as a single local authority. The analysis that we've done, for example, on connectivity supports this. Bradford local authority is the most congested one. West Yorkshire is above England's average in congestion, and Bradford is quite high. We know that all places fell after the pandemic, but still more congested than average. And for example, we only have data for Leeds Central, but pretty much we are at capacity in terms of rail at peak times, and we know that people move from other places as well. So there seems to be a very important factor on connectivity to integrate these areas more deeply, but also there are other factors. So for Bradford to attract people from other places and residents of Bradford to go to other places also means the opportunities that you can benefit from and the opportunities that you have. And as I said, inclusive growth is a very important part of the strategy. We are doing work on this. We know that life expectancy, for example, it's lower than the average. There's still a significant part of the workforce that receives wages below the real living wage, and economic inactivity it's an issue. And from this map, we can see that, for example, physical proximity to opportunity. So, for example, there's a lot of wide areas around Leeds. It doesn't translate exactly in prosperity. There are other levers. Being next to good jobs and growing jobs is not enough. So we'll look at connectivity. We'll go deeper on the skills, but it's also important to understand a second component of the inclusive growth. There's the pay one and terms and conditions, real wage, but also the cost of living one. So because inclusive growth, it's not all of it driven by the labor market. We need to, and we know now, we need to keep cost of living in check. So interventions around housing, energy efficiency, reducing bills need to be also part of the package of understanding how the economy grows for everyone. That's all.
Thanks, Guy. And I think it's worth saying that there's a much more detailed version of that pack that's informing this work. So a really big piece of work that Guy has been leading on with the R&I team. So I was just going to briefly touch on some of the wider work that's going on as we develop this economic strategy that's covered in the briefing pack, and then talk a little bit about the emerging framework before we pause for questions and comments. So alongside the economic assessment, we have got a sector study being undertaken by Cambridge Econometrics. So they are looking at sector strengths and emerging clusters in West Yorkshire. They've done a national study for the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, and they're now doing a West Yorkshire version of that for us. So they're looking at where our traditional sector strengths that we have in West Yorkshire and the crossover opportunities with emerging tech clusters. and they've used their quite innovative methodology to map out 3 broad groups which they see as opportunities to really drive productivity growth in West Yorkshire. So we've already got some good examples through the work we're doing in health tech and an investment zone on how that approach has worked well. So there's an opportunity to look at that and how that can be applied to some of these other emerging sector strengths for the region. So the next phase of that work is to really drill down into some of those specific opportunities and what that means for exporting, for investment, for spatial needs. And when we come to the workshop in March, we'll have that study ready, so that we'll be able to present the findings and the policy implications of that and what that means for the strategy. We've also been doing a piece of work with the West Yorkshire universities and the WIPER network. And this was really about trying to gather more evidence on some of those broader drivers on productivity around things like childcare and the informal economy and what that means. So the pack sets out a summary of those responses, and there is more work ongoing to look at these, particularly on the childcare. The University of Leeds have secured some further funding to do a systems study on childcare in West Yorkshire, and we are working with various of the academics that responded to that call for evidence to draw in particular expertise on aspects of that. So there's clearly a lot being covered in the evidence review, a lot of issues emerging, and so what we try to do is start to draw together a framework to look at all of this evidence, and the framework that's in the pack really draws on the West Yorkshire Plan drivers. So that's where it's got that inclusive, sustainable growth that we talked about, equality, diversity and inclusion, and health in all policies at the centre, and then looks at what that means for different areas of our work, the different levers that we have, and the different drivers of the economy. So we're starting to think about what some of those priorities might mean, particularly for the business side of things, as is covered in the pack for this committee. And so really looking at then where we focus, and it's sort of a two-pronged approach on that. So thinking about those sectors where we have a comparative advantage in West Yorkshire, what are those emerging opportunities in terms of driving growth and the benefits those will bring to the region. What's our role there? I mentioned health tech and investment zones, but can we learn from that approach and apply that to other areas of the economy where we know there's going to be an emerging opportunity for the region? But alongside that, not losing the focus on wider sectors of the economy that still employ large numbers of people, but we know are less likely to sort of really drive that productivity. But there it's really focusing on good work and initiatives like our Fair Work Charter and what that means for some of those sectors and our role there. And I think skills really cuts across all of those things, and you know, those skills pathways through careers and really bringing that to those two focuses. We've also identified finance, access to finance and investment for the region and our role there, and particularly around place-based impact investment and investment for good, but also investment for underrepresented groups. So we have identified gaps, national but also in West Yorkshire as well. Another important priority is that point around simplifying the business sport ecosystem, which isn't necessarily a new priority, and you know, I think we've all identified that it's become more and more challenging as things have sort of become more fragmented, as funding has been not as long term, and lots of changes sort of nationally and regionally about how we organise. But this is where devolution does give us an opportunity with more certainty around funding to try to really simplify that offer, and not just about simplifying it, but then how we get that out to groups across the region and really tapping into those networks across the board, and you know, really thinking about where those informal networks operate and how do we get that message out to those groups as well, to make sure that, you know, all businesses are aware of the support that we can offer them. So I'll pause there, and as I say, happy to take sort of questions on either elements of the presentation, but also thinking about what we might want to cover in March and the things that we should bring to that workshop. If there's any particular elements of this you want us to do more on or bring out more views on, that would be really welcome. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Joan. I'll open it up to the committee for questions or comments, please. Martin, please.
If nobody else is asking a question, I will. I think really interesting, and I think particularly looking at sector strengths and the cluster analysis. And one of my questions is really around the definition of emerging tech as opposed to net zero and advanced manufacturing, because I look at that diagram and particularly, is there a definition they're using to say, okay, this sector is emerging tech? Because again, I look at that diagram and I'm struggling to understand that, to be totally honest. And again, probably because I haven't got the granularity around it, but it was just really better understanding the use of terms and how that, this is on page 57, how that has been put together really.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, and so we'll be able to, as I say, once we've got the complete report, be able to share that. But what they've done is they've taken sort of three approaches to how they've defined the sectors in the emerging clusters. So they've done sort of a traditional analysis using the SIC codes, as we've done in our assessment as well. They use web scraping. So they've worked with Data City to do this. So Data City Group, what they called RTICs, real-time information codes, using website classifications of businesses' activity to group them. But they've also done a qualitative assessment, so drawing on our own policies and strategies and where we've identified particular sectors of the strength. And so they've sort of synthesised those three different approaches to come up with these clusters. And I think there's, we've reflected on kind of some of the links that they've drawn and what sits in what circle. And I think there is, that's a subjective assessment in terms of those relationships and things. So there's certainly, scope to influence and think, well, actually we'd see that line going there, whatever. But those are the three approaches that they've taken to the classification, and that's how they've come up with this. And it's emerging and developing, and more is going on.
Okay, no, thank you very much.
Thank you. Asma, please.
Thank you. Just a couple of observations, both from the perspective of coming from the legal services sector. It was good to see that we are a strong sector within Leeds. Disappointing to see that we still underperform in terms of what the figures look like. Is that because people are still outsourcing that work outside of Leeds and using London-based firms? I would like a deep dive into knowing if we're a sector that's considered to be financial services and legal sector, where's the work going? Is it going other than within our region? So that's an observation. Then putting my hat on in terms of an employer in the legal sector and looking at the Bradford figures there, it's interesting that the CVs that sort of land on our desk are from York, from areas around. They don't come from the most diverse city, which is Bradford. Where is that gap in terms of them even, that the students there even applying to Leeds? Do they see it out of their reach? What is going on behind that? Because I'm not seeing those CVs coming in. I see people relocating to our region, applying to my firm for a job, but I don't seem to see people in the locality from diverse and underrepresented communities applying for those same positions. So another deep dive kind of a thing which I'd like to look at in more detail when the time's right. And then just one other observation in terms of the CREM report, which highlighted diverse investment as one of those key areas that diverse investment, like the angel investment side. And I know you've touched upon that in this report. The Gender Index reported recently that the government announced that by 31st of January, the threshold for being an angel investor was going to be increased. So I think it's going up from 100,000 to 170,000. And now this is already on the Mayor's radar, we've raised this and we're in discussions, but I just wanted to put out there that I think the economic strategy needs to look at the gender imbalance and the diversity imbalance that may creep in on protected characteristics that are not going to be in the running for angel investment, and are we making a problem that already exists worse, and what do we do about it? Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, please.
Absolutely, really good points, thanks, Asma. And I think that point about the CVs, absolutely. And part of this is thinking about, you know, what this means for skills, but careers in particular, and how, you know, it's not just about stimulating these opportunities in the region, it's how do we make, and that's where the inclusive growth comes in, how do we support people in the region to be able to make the most of those opportunities, and that careers piece, you know, right the way through school is really important. And yeah, absolutely agree on the investment point, and as you say, it's on radars, but we do need to bring that into this work as well, so we'll look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, please. Oh, sorry. Go on, Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean it's yeah, we've been kept informed of the development of the economic strategy, and it's useful to have this early sight of the emerging analysis and themes, and that's obviously feeding into our, as I've mentioned before, with refreshing our inclusive economy strategy. That, however, has got to be finalised by March this year. So I think I know that Bradford are maybe sort of holding back on some of their work, but I think we're going to have to just sort of like press ahead. So we might have to need to revise some of the areas of focus once we've done that. But that is just how it is. The summary analysis is that the West Yorkshire is a resilient, diversified and polycentric economy that nevertheless has struggled to keep pace with national growth and productivity, which has had an adverse effect on living standards. And that's useful to have that information. It's a useful backdrop for where we are. I think also WICA are proposing proposing further detailed analysis of key cluster areas where you see potential for growth. So initial analysis, it says, has identified 3 main overlapping groups, each of which represent an opportunity for the region, which is advancing manufacturing, emerging tech, and net zero. And these present lots of opportunities for us in Colesdale, which is great, especially the advanced manufacturing and net zero. But however, we'd need to reinforce the challenges of digital connectivity. I think, you know, for us in Colesdale, we're quite rural, to benefit in growth opportunities. So yeah, we need to get the basics right as well. So for the foundation of the economy, enablers in place for growth, and also if we're able to get access to and be able to feed into a cluster analysis, it'd be really good to have Colesdale business representation in discussions where possible. But yeah, that digital connectivity is a big thing in our very rural place. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the places I do my council advice sessions, I can't use my iPad because I can't get a 3G, 4G signal. And they've asked about getting Wi-Fi and there's no capacity. So,
It's not just Colesdale.
yeah, no, it's not just Colesdale. It's amazing how, it's amazing you don't have to go far to find areas where there is no connectivity. Joe, please.
Yeah, I think just to say on the Calderdale strategy, so we're working close with the officers there, and we're aware of a little bit of that alignment. So I think, you know, we are we're working on making sure that there's nothing that, you know, is going to vastly not align across the two strategies. And I think, yeah, on the digital connectivity, I think what we need to get across in this strategy is how all of these issues interlink, and it's not, you know, one particular thing, and it's not this here, this there. It's actually, there's so many connections between the different issues, and we really need to bring that out into our thinking and our interventions about how all of these things interact, to meet these challenges. So that's something definitely that yeah, we need to build in.
Thank you. So on that point about interlinkages, health is obviously in the cluster analysis. It was really good to see it also on page 65 in that circle at the heart of the various pillars there in the framework. And I just wanted to bring out a link from health, not just as a cluster, but also in terms of population health, health deprivation, which I know we've talked about a lot in other forums, and the link with productivity. And this is something that we were discussing yesterday, looking at Sarah with Treasury, who were on a visit to Huddersfield, and in the context of talking about our National Health Innovation Campus, which is a big strong interest of ours about the link between health and productivity. Their ears were pricking up at this, so I think there is appetite to hear about those, you know, broader relationships between health and productivity in an economic strategy. Certainly they sounded interested in how that might work, so I do think we should definitely pursue that line of thinking there. Thank you.
Thank you. Palvinder, please.
Thanks, Joe. Excellent piece of work from both presentations. I just picking up a point that Asma made. That made me think was that the softer skills element of the economic growth. So the hard edge stuff you're working on, but the softer skills of professional capitals, the raising of aspirations, and fundamentally, we all understand that groupthink is opposite to driving productivity. So if we're receiving the same CVs from the same areas, then that maybe that does need to be looked at in terms of the softer elements of things. And for an economic growth strategy, we're going to need to do something different and look at things in a different way. So I just wonder whether the aspirational professional capitals needs to be looked at.
Definitely, and I think it comes back to that circle and it speaks to Sue's point about health as well. So, you know, we can't just put things into different boxes, that it has got to come back to those cost-cutting issues. So we're talking about those opportunities. What does that mean filtering right through across, all of those issues? And that's what an inclusive economy is about, isn't it? So I definitely, not easy necessarily, but that's got to be the framework that we put in there, and then how we apply that to the interventions that we deliver and that we support going forward.
Just to give you a practical example, so the skills gaps are very technical skills gaps. They're not soft skills gaps. Teamwork, communication, ability to present, and until we drive that as what the soft skills that employers are wanting, and then people that think different, look different, come from different backgrounds, can think, yes, I can do that.
Thank you. Carl, please.
Thank you, Chair. Fantastic report. Thank you very much, both of you. Did you say that we're going to have a more robust kind of concept around what inclusive growth means in the context of this? Something more granular, as Palvinder said, as Asma said, and there are so many other examples around structural barriers to inclusive growth and how those might be overcome. I think that would be very helpful, and I think we might actually be more forthright, even at this higher level stage, in making a commitment to that, and referencing key messaging from CREM, from the North Star report that was commissioned by the Combined Authority, and from other sources, and then that provides that kind of consistency from initial policy design right through to the delivery plans. I think that'd be really helpful, to be honest. And to Mr. Rodriguez, because I can't pronounce you, I can't pronounce your first name, so sorry about that. But interesting about the congestion issues in Bradford, and what kind of period are we, has that kind of analysis been done? Because there's a heck of a lot of work going on in the city centre at the moment, and it will last for about another year. Are we talking about congestion issues before that started, and what might some of the root causes and solutions be going forward to those?
So the higher than UK average and West Yorkshire average levels of congestion in Bradford seem to be something from the last at least 5-6 years since we have data. There's fluctuations, but even after post-pandemic, seems to be something constant. Unfortunately, we don't have the data granularity to know some of the details. I spoke with some colleagues on the transport team, and they think it's more about the local authority as a whole, the not so urban areas. So sometimes we think, they have train station, it's relatively well connected, but the local authority is pretty large. Maybe the road infrastructure is not, and it has a lot of population. The local authority itself could be capacity constraints on that side, which we don't know in general the UK tend to have capacity constraints, both public and private transport, but unfortunately we don't have the level of granularity and time detail to identify from the data of the FT exactly from where it's going on. But from the geography, we suspect there's something about the whole area. It's not only about typical congestion at the center. For example, Leeds is one of the local authorities with lower congestion. It's still very high, but lower within West Yorkshire, which flags this question about non-urban areas being quite congested as well.
I mean, Chair, thank you for that. Because there is a concern that the second largest city in West Yorkshire and a major travel to work area is still underperforming because of these kind of issues around, roads and infrastructure, and it affects the rest of the sub-region. So I don't know, how we might, in terms of looking at the planning strategies going forward, be able to have some answers and recommendations, for how we kind of fix this problem.
If I can have a go at that, Carl. Please not to be talking about congestion in Leeds for once. I think we've always recognised, going back to when we started sort of on the West Yorkshire devolution journey over 10 years ago, that one of the significant things we need to get out of devolution to West Yorkshire was more investment in transport to deal with the congestion that we have in the county. And it's always been, I used to be chair of the Transport Authority for West Yorkshire. It's a standalone organisation. And I think I've always challenged the view that congestion is just an issue that affects some very small parts of West Yorkshire. Measured in sort of pure, cars at peak time, cars at peak time isn't the whole story. It's about how slow some relatively short journeys can be around the county, and that's not just saying it's about how do you get into Leeds to Bradford Centre on a weekday morning between 7 and 9. It is a lot of statistics about actually how slow it is to make some journeys in West Yorkshire on a mile per hour basis. And I suspect that's where those figures might come from, and that's actually underlining a lot of what the transport strategy for West Yorkshire is around bus reform, mass transit investment, the work we've done around the traditional rail, things like the East-West Link, Leeds-Bradford, Manchester, the existing Transpennine Leeds, Huddersfield, Manchester. A lot of that work is around actually making journeys around West Yorkshire quicker and more efficient. So I suspect that's where that congestion data comes from. I don't have figures to pluck off at the fingertips. I'm not involved in West Yorkshire transport as much as I used to be, but it always has been a factor around the poor quality of infrastructure we have right across the county and the impact that has on journey times and therefore economic performance. And that's West Yorkshire as a whole. It's it's not who's coming into Leeds City Centre or Bradford City Centre at a sort of Monday to Friday or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning at a peak time. And I think that sort of probably underlines a lot of that. And like I say, that was, I'm going back to the early 2010s, but that's what drove devolution and moving towards probably 3 or 4 terms of jargon ago to sort of the northern powerhouse and saying, actually, if we can better connect the north of England, then our economy will perform better. And the congestion, the slowness of journey times in Bradford is a manifestation of the problems that we have to tackle. Does anybody else want to come in? Sarah, please.
Just on that, is Tracy lobbying hard to get any of the HS2 money?
Yes. Yeah, we're certainly very we're very keen it doesn't just go to potholes in North London.
Yes, absolutely.
Would anybody else like to come in?
Chair,
Asma, please.
Just quickly, Joe touched upon the Fair Work Charter, and I know there's an agenda item going forward. I do think we've got a great platform there to push on the inclusivity from an employer buy-in perspective, and I think we ought to probably look at that in deeper detail and push that out there, because that requires external input and buy-in, which doesn't necessarily dictate what goes on here, but it's the private sector buy-in. And I think we will be missing a trick if we don't align those values, get people to buy into the Fair Work Charter, and you're automatically kind of signing up to inclusivity on a wider scale.
Thank you. So on item 7, does anybody else want to come in on this item? I can't see anybody showing their hands. The recommendation is that we note the contents of the evidence summary and provide feedback, and I think we have done that, so that's helpful, Joe, for our next session with that. So with that, I shall move on to item 8, please, and Sophie, please, would you like to present this report?
Thank you very much. It's probably quite timely that we've moved on to the digital blueprint, noting sort of concerns around connectivity. So as part of the briefing pack, you should have access to sort of the covering report and then the first draft copy of the digital blueprint. I think we first introduced this last year, and then we provided an update on the approach at the last committee. So thank you everyone for your feedback on that thus far. So the paper as a whole sort of covered the themes, which we cover in the blueprint, and sort of the extensive consultation that has taken place to date. So today, as part of this, I'd like to gauge thoughts on sort of the first draft as a whole. So please take note that this is actually a pre-designed version. So if you'd just like to focus sort of on the content, and then we'll obviously at a later date move on to sort of designing that with our marketing team. So as part of this, and as part of the update today, Felix has asked that we sort of explain what will change as a result of the work that we're doing, and what we're going to do better as a result of this. This digital blueprint will change the way that we approach all things digital across the region, and that's coming from a system thinking methodology. So to explain this, we want you to sort of picture sort of digital infrastructure, sort of the smart cities agenda, sort of separate to skills and business, but they're all interconnected, and together they form a whole. Digital we recognise as a complex system within which we really need to pull each lever to reap all the benefits that it has to offer. Using this systems approach will help us better understand what helps or hinders the success of sort of digital interventions in the future. So for example, digital inclusion. To make sure we're not leaving anyone behind, we've got to look at the reasons why people are digitally excluded across the whole system. This can be from different perspectives of both skills, business and infrastructure. Digital exclusion is a result of many different things that can be psychological, social, environmental and also economic factors as well. And these all interact with one another. So can't be tackled in isolation. The outcomes of the blueprint aim to avoid simple linear cause and effect programs. Instead, what we want to do is zoom out to the bigger picture and steer us to work outside the boundaries of sort of traditional programs and structures. This will help us make real change across the region, some of which will be measurable and some of which will be sort of reflected improvements that will take along in the future. So obviously here today to try and get sort of comments and reflections on sorts of blueprint to date, and also hopefully endorsement. Over the coming weeks and months, we'll be looking for endorsement from Place Committee and also sort of Employment and Skills Committee as well. And that's with a hope to take that to the Combined Authority Committee for approval later on in the summer, ahead of then publication. So just to note, I'm presenting this today on behalf of the team, so there's probably going to be questions that I'm not going to be able to ask. So I've sort of generally come to it from sort of the place-based perspective of infrastructure and sort of smart cities. So please do bear with me if there are sort of questions that I'm unable to answer. But in order to sort of get the conversation going, we're sort of very sort of interested to know sort of what your thoughts are to date, and I've just got a couple of sort of questions to pose to you, if that's okay. So from our perspective, so we'd really like to know sort of, is the content of the digital blueprint reflective of the strengths and challenges of business and organisations in the region? Are the outcomes as they relate to business and organisations ambitious enough, and if not, how can we go further and how can we make them bolder? And lastly, do you have any other feedback or advice on how we can, on how the digital blueprint could be improved ahead of us basically taking this to design? That's going to be our next step. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Great, thank you. Does anybody on the committee want to come in on this piece of work, please. Martin, please.
It seems to be becoming a pattern, doesn't it? So I'm going to just have a disclaimer because I guess I'm going to give you a Leeds view here, because just reading the paper and looking at the presentation, I think the assets and the capabilities we've got within Leeds are not reflected strongly enough. And I'm saying that purely because I think there's an opportunity to leverage that across the broader region and the cities. So again, there's a number of examples, but if you look at the Leeds Digital Festival, that's a really good example where, you know, that's been built up from scratch. It's one of the biggest, I think, open technical tech festivals in the UK, but is there an opportunity to start saying, okay, let's leverage some of that strength more broadly? And I use that as one example. I've probably got another 3 or 4 examples, but just, and again, I apologise, it's a Leeds-centric view. I try not to do that, but I just think there's assets and capabilities that we should be thinking about leveraging for the wider benefit of the region, if that makes sense.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. Sort of 3 conversations that we've been having to date, that's sort of a common occurrence. So we're trying to sort of have discussions internally on how best we sort of obviously make sure that we're sort of getting recognition for sort of the digital sector across West Yorkshire as a whole, but recognising that there are sort of events and pieces in the calendar, such as sort of the Leeds Digital Festival, which can have sort of massive leverages for the region as a whole. So point noted, and we'll sort of continue to have those discussions and see best how we can fit that into the agenda.
No, that's good. I'm glad you've heard that from other people. And I think the other areas around smart cities, and again, there's some good stuff happening. I'm aware of what's happening in Leeds. I'm sure there's stuff happening more widely as well.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to come in on this paper? Simon, please.
Just on maybe a point around cybersecurity. We've obviously got tons of SMEs all across Yorkshire. We're at the minute going through the process of getting ISO 27000, which is all around information security and all the locks on the doors and all the kind of 2-factor authentication that you've got to have on all your business information. It's been quite a challenge, and there's not many smaller businesses from the process, we've been told, that manage to get through it. So if we've got this big play with AI and data and everything like that, we might need to think about how we're going to help the smaller businesses get through things like Cyber Essentials and the 27000 standards for information security.
Okay, I'll take that back to the team if that's okay, but that's a great point and really interesting. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'll turn to the recommendations then, and which is that we endorse the blueprint with current progress in mind and take feedback towards final design. So if everybody is happy with that, that's great, thank you. We'll move on to item 9, please, Natasha.
Yep, hi everyone. So I'm just going to give a quick update on investment zones. So we've been working with local authorities and universities to draft both revenue and capital interventions, and they've been outlined in the report. So the capital interventions will be based in Kirklees, Bradford and Leeds. However, benefits of all interventions should be felt region-wide, and we're starting to work out what those interventions look like. So this is an opportunity for the committee to give us a little bit of feedback on the interventions based on the questions in the report. So the questions are the revenue interventions proposed the right ones? Is there anything missing? Where should we focus our activity? Should we need to? So should we focus on start-up, scale-up, or attracting new companies to the region? And how do we maximise business investment and leverage greater resources for investment zones? And just to note that before we go into questioning that interventions have been mapped against current activity. So for example, the Launchpad, the health tech Launchpad, and investment zones are kind of a real opportunity to work on that innovation and productivity gap that Joe mentioned earlier in the conversation. So yeah, just move on to questions if that's okay, if anyone other than.
Thank you. Can anybody like to come in on this paper, please? Sue, please.
Thank you. So I support this paper, declare an interest, because I'm involved with Natasha and the other partners in developing the work on enterprise zones. We really have tried to leverage the power of the universities, which is the theme that runs through investment zones, and to make sure that the benefit of that, all that research activity can act as a boost to economic growth in those areas. So, and also knit together very closely with the economic development activity of the local authority partners. So, so we spent a lot of time discussing this, and we think we've come up with a balanced range of activities there. So I would support the list of revenue activities, and in terms of the focus, I think we've got to do all of those categories of business personally. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. On the question of the are they the right revenue proposals and where the focus should sit, I think it's important that the planned activities, for example, the inward investment resource and academic brokerage services, that they should integrate with existing service delivery so that there's clear pathways for businesses. And if we have to prioritise as a result of limited resources, then could some of these proposals perhaps be delivered using existing resources? I think that's one thought. And then also Calderdale, we've got a great track record of startups and would benefit from further support. We're likely to make a case for additional advice for the next wave of funding. However, scale up is likely to bring broader benefits, more employment, greater resilience. Just to note that Huddersfield University is continuing to ensure that that there's links to Calderdale and other areas a bit less proactive, and maybe there's a role for WICA to ensure that the revenue interventions bring benefits across the sub-region, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we're currently looking at how we can leverage and provide match to our interventions. So we'll be looking at current ways that we, engage with different stakeholders. So yeah, we're already looking at that and mapping that, and we're currently working up how implementation is going to go. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Somebody else? Lee, please.
Can we have both at once? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that there's not really a lot in here to disagree with, really. Accelerators, incubators, private investment, all really important parts of the ecosystem, and the more we can do to support that, I think that's really, yeah.
Thank you. Martin, please.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate, obviously, we very much support this and what's being proposed in terms of the priorities. I think just building on Councillor Sarah's, Courtney's point, it's really important that we don't duplicate current provision here. So again, this has to be additive, and the way this joins up, thinking about this from a business perspective is particularly useful, or particularly we need to pay attention to. I think the other thing which I'd note is, I think the actual investment zone proposal now being 10 years and a two-phased approach, I think is extremely helpful in terms of attracting investment, and particularly private investment, into this as well.
Thank you. If nobody else wants to come in, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 129, and I take it everybody is happy with those. Happy with those recommendations. That's great. So I'll move on to item 10, please, and Joe Wilkins.
Just to note that I know that there's a workshop on the 7th of February, isn't there? That the design. I'm not able to make that. Is it okay for someone else to come along? Is that okay from Calderdale rather than? Yeah, it's not like this meeting where it's not no subs. It's, yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Great, no problem, Sarah. Thank you for bringing that up. So, on to item 10, please. Joe, would you like to introduce this paper, please?
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, this is about the Fair Work Charter. So it was launched in November. We had 47 early adopters that took on the charter, which was brilliant, and from all across all sides of business and sectors. We have now brought on delivery partner Greenborough, who started second week of January. So we're still fairly early on into the rollout of the charter. We have commissioned a marketing agency, 310-7, who are currently putting together a marketing campaign which will go live, I think, about the second week of February, and that will predominantly be a social media campaign. To date, because, like I say, we're very early on, we're just trying to get that back-end processes in place. So we haven't done any proactive marketing, but including the early adopters, we already have, as of yesterday, 108 businesses signed up. Of that, we've got 38% are large, 19 medium, 28% small, and 11% micro. We've got a good mix, and across the districts, Leeds highest at 52%, but Bradford at 21%, Calderdale 7%, Kirklees 14%, and Wakefield 6%. We've got a good spread as well at the minute of business type. So we have 61% of those are private sector, 21% public sector, and 18% are from the voluntary and community sector. And a good cross-section of business sectors. Our highest, looking at the figures, because it was, a lot of these have come from the early adopters, we haven't got the data that we will be able to get. So there's quite a few at the minute classed as other, but we'll get to the bottom of that. But we do have quite a high number on financial and legal professional services and health and medical, and then digital technology and manufacturing. That's good. We've also making some really good links with some partner organisations and networks to help us kind of spread the word, and also to help develop resources and share resources. So when a business signs up, they'll have access to a portal, and they'll be able to have access to things that we will create or Greenborough will create. So at the minute, they're looking at creating about 20 videos that are all based on the 5 pillars and being able to just give that additional support to businesses. We have made links with Yorkshire Sport, and we're looking at aligning what we're doing with some of their content, and they'll be signing up. We had a good session on Friday with members from different teams of Calderdale Council, and they're really keen to be able to promote across the businesses. And actually a very good feedback from them was that to produce a very short sort of animation video that people can use to be able to promote, so we're looking at doing that. Transpennine Express are really keen to be able to learn about the charter, and they really want to be able to promote that to their supply chains. We're talking to Kirklees and Calderdale Health and Care Partnership, as well as our internal teams. We've also been speaking to Nexus, looking at promoting it to their tenants. We're also linking internally with policing and crime, so we're very much talking about the link with the safety of women and girls strategy, and how they can get involved, not only sharing resources, but coming along and running some workshops for businesses as well. So I think that's everything. If anyone has any questions.
Great, thank you, Joe. Somebody want to come in on this item, please? Asma, please.
Just in terms of the people that have reached out to confirm, how about FSB and Chamber of Commerce? Are they on the agenda to contact?
Yeah, sorry, I did forget to mention. So we've also setting up a steering group. First meeting will be towards the end of February, and we've got the Chamber. The FSB is a vice chair on that. But yes, we've also reached out to the membership organisations.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to hear that you've been working well with the officers in Calderdale, and I think one of the comments was about whether Greenborough could do some presentations for us, but I think a video at a business networking event would be really useful. Obviously, it's early days with them being in place, but it would be really good to see them active in the borough. I mean, I think a video is a great idea, obviously, but I think to actually be able to see them, active across all the sort of regions. But obviously, I'm speaking for Calderdale here. But yeah, that would be really good. I think the only other thing was possibly in the summary to have had, you've given us a verbal breakdown of the sort of size of businesses that have signed up and the sector and that sort of stuff. It'd be useful to maybe have that in sort of graphic form in the report. Would be really useful, I think. And ongoing monitoring information that provides this level of detail, I think would be it'd be really good to have that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to come in on this item? Sarah, please.
Thank you. So as well as providing the information update, we really wanted to use this as a bit of a call to action as well for organisations and businesses around the table and your networks, and how do we roll this out as much as we possibly can through our existing networks that we've got. So any reflections on that, or that would be really welcome.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to come in? I don't see any, so I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 136, and I take it everybody's happy with those recommendations. That's great, thank you. So we'll move on to item 11, please. And Louise, you're going to introduce this paper.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So the paper gives an overview of regional programme performance against the State of the Region indicator. So that's delivery that's delivered by the Combined Authority or commissioned by us as well. So one area that I'd like to expand on actually is the Business Sustainability Support Service. That began delivery in April 23 and it's funded through Gainshare until March 26. It sits under the Growth Service and alongside the Innovation and Productivity Support. So up to December 23, 238 businesses have been supported. 156 of those have had an action plan and 118 have received intensive support to help with the sustainability goals. And the target up to 26 is to support 300 businesses. So just wanted to flag that as being obviously a really high demand for that service, has been really popular. And across the service, committed carbon savings so far of 500 tonnes CO2 and 1.2 million kilowatt hour of renewable energy generation. There's also in the paper details of 2 new programmes, one focusing on skills and one on the creative industries. And the committee will be updated on progress of those programmes over the coming meetings. I also wanted to mention, it's not in the paper, the Mayor's Innovation Challenge invitation to bid went live yesterday. So we're looking for suppliers to deliver this work, and it builds on the Mayor's Innovation Prize pilot that was delivered last year. And also in the paper it mentions that policy work is ongoing to review enterprise and business startup support in the region. So we're reviewing current provision and if or where there are any gaps to support individuals or new businesses. The work will use the findings from the economic strategy research to ensure an evidence-led approach, and members of this committee will be consulted and a broad range of people will be invited to contribute in the development of that work, and will ensure that equity, diversity and inclusion continue to be central.
Thank you, Louise. Are there any questions or comments on this paper, please? Sue, please.
Thank you. Yes, under the creative industries theme, and also possibly with a link to the enterprise review, I just wondered if there's been given whether any further thought has been given to support for maker spaces to help students who are graduating from a creative course where they've got some ideas. I know we've discussed this with some of Felix's colleagues to see whether that is an asset that the region has that could be further exploited, particularly to get those graduates to stick around in West Yorkshire and build their collections, if it's fashion, or their short runs, if it's textiles and those kind of things, because that is an element of the creative industries that we could really support well, given our assets in this region. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take that on board and explore it in the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. I'm making up for not being here last time. Yes, it's great that we're going to have one of the business skills advisors in Colesdale. We're happy about that. We also note and welcome the financial commitment to green skills, but we'd quite like to know what the timescales are for the development and implementation on that, particularly given that the Green Jobs Task Force Action Plan launches this month. We just thought it would be good to have that moving at sort of pace, really. Connected, and then we can connect that to our own climate action and green plan and green economy theme. I think we note that Enterprise West Yorkshire has been a successful model, and our startup delivery in Calderdale is particularly strong. I think we've got really good figures for those. But again, it's about sort of needing to have a commitment to moving at pace, so that the delivery arrangements, we can firm up the delivery arrangements beyond October 24. That would be really helpful. We don't want to risk losing capacity and infrastructure across the sort of sub-region, and for that to have a negative impact on our ability then to support businesses. I mean, this is obviously all in the context of budgetary constraints that we've got in our. I'm sure everyone has got in across their individual organisations. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that really valid point. So take them on board. Thank you.
Come to me, Felix. Felix, please.
Yeah, really good points there, Councillor. Thank you very much. I think a couple of things. One, the review that Louise referred to is meant to pick up, really help us understand what the state of play is now across West Yorkshire when it comes to how we engage with businesses, the advisory services that are available, where the gaps are, what we can do better. And obviously, given the tight budgetary environment, what we can do better and what we need to stop doing to be able to prioritize and to be a bit more successful. So hopefully that will pick up some of what you've mentioned there. The makerspace bit that's Sue talked about, there's some work we've just kicked off in the cultural heritage and sport service area, just to review what our activities should be post Years of Culture. So that was only kicked off last week with a workshop at the committee, and that will run for the next few months just to get thoughts. So this will be one of the things that we will feed into that session. I think widely, some of these programs that we've got probably only just kicked off, and it's a bit early to understand fully what the impact has been. But on the green skills bit, we are looking to get a session together. We're working with the universities and CBI to put a session together in the next couple of months, maybe hopefully quicker than that, to help us design that green skills, green jobs service properly. Because yes, we've got provision for it, but we don't want to design something within this building as officers saying this is what we're going to do and run with it. So we're going to go out and consult and engage with employers to work out what will work for them before we come back. So we'll provide some more information on that.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you, Felix. Carl, please.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. And I did note that Felix mentioned limited budgets, and it is a factor that we have to acknowledge, which gives me the opportunity to kind of re-emphasize what Sarah said, which was a very, very strong point at the last item, which is, how we can utilize our networks to get information out there. And I don't think we do that as well as we could do. And I think what would help us if we could get some very simple links, that we can just forward on, which is, not a difficult thing to do, but has potential huge impact. I mean, on the Fair Work Charter and, the businesses, employers that do, train at your place, Palvinder, and at your institution, and how that could cascade through our own networks quite simply. But I think at this side, we just need to have a better system of getting that information out to us and others. And I think it's a very, very strong, powerful point that Sarah made. Yeah.
Thank you, and I do think it is an important part of the work we can do outside these meetings is looking at spreading the word of the work that's happening. Thank you. Is there anybody else on this item to come in, please? Martin, please.
Can I just give an update around the Innovative Entrepreneurs Programme?
Please.
So that's a programme obviously funded under Enterprise West Yorkshire. It was successfully launched on the 11th of January. We've got 24 individuals, entrepreneurs who are very passionate around what they're doing. Clearly, one of the elements around this was around diversity and inclusion. And if you look at the makeup of the first cohort, 46% are female, 54% are ethnic minority background, and 4% have a disability. And all of the areas within the region, all of the cities are represented. So it's off to a great start, and the second workshop is actually tomorrow, hosted at the 3M BIC Centre in Huddersfield by Sue. So I just thought I'd mention that. I know it wasn't mentioned in the paper, but I thought it was just worth really successful start, and the collaboration and the consortium are doing a phenomenal job working together. So just wanted that to be noted.
Thank you, really helpful. So I'm going to turn to the recommendations on page 147, and I take it everybody is happy with those recommendations. So we will move on to item 12, please, Sarah.
Thank you. So this paper is around how do we strengthen and harness private sector engagement in all our activity as a combined authority. It's been prompted very much by changes to national changes to LEPs and where LEPs head and where LEPs go, and we have set up the West Yorkshire Business Board to replace the LEP. There's also a proposal to set up a Mayor's Council to engage with more of the bigger businesses in the region. But the principle about engaging better across the range of businesses they've got, whether they're smaller, micro, larger, whatever sector, is something we're really keen to strengthen. And so one of the proposals we've got is to set up or establish a business engagement framework that sets out the key principles of how we will engage with businesses across the range of activity, whether it's transport, housing, business support, the whole gambit of everything that we do as a combined authority. So the paper sets out some key principles, this is very much a starter for 10, key principles for how we may engage with businesses on a range of activity. It sets out some reflections about how do we make sure we are engaging sensitively and timely, but also in a way that we're not cutting across our local authority partners, and we're doing it in collaboration, so it's not kind of overburden businesses, and we're also not over-engaging on various things. Some key principles listed out in the report, and really there's some questions at the end there which are really kind of seeking your input in terms of what works out there, what have you come across that works really well in terms of business engagement. And I know, Martin, you've done a lot at Nexus around business engagement. What kind of methods and communication channels can be really effective, examples of good practice, key principles and mechanisms, and particularly how do we make sure we are reaching and talking to and hearing from diverse businesses across the region, across the whole region. And going back to Cal's point about tapping into networks, how do we make sure we are using those networks more effectively across everything that we're doing? So any reflections at this stage, because it is early development, we'll bring back to a future meeting a worked up version of what this might look like.
Thanks, Sarah. Anyone want to come in on this item, please? Sarah, please.
So this early discussion is really welcomed. Not sure how helpful it is in reflecting the wider picture of business engagement at a sub-regional level. There's only one business representative from Calderdale on the new business board, which, and Calderdale businesses are not really represented in sufficient numbers across WICA committees. So while there's a recognition within WICA that this is not appropriate and the need for us to be more proactive, but that obviously hasn't been converted. So I think we're going to take some responsibility for that. But I think if you can, prod us as well. But and invite us, that would be really helpful. So the mayor's, obviously, as you mentioned, is bringing together the Mayor's Council, which is explicitly formed of big businesses. And there's only, obviously we're relatively small in terms of business centres, and there's only 3 out of the 43 businesses are from Calderdale. But we need to make sure that it doesn't inadvertently undermine the positive relationships with SMEs and micro-enterprises, which I know Tracy really values, and she recognises the importance of those. So just whether we need to sort of get a bit more detail on that might be useful. We're still waiting, our business engagement team are waiting for communication from WICA on the business engagement framework. And so getting officer input would be really helpful to help move that on. Then another point is around the ensuring a strong join up to local level business engagement will be important, potentially building local capacity in the medium term. Specifically on the questions that you've asked, just to finish off, the principles possibly need to be, condensed down. Some of them aren't principles but are more methods, so it's just a bit of tightening on that. I totally agree with put time and effort and resources into business engagement, and obviously we should be doing that using our principles of subsidiarity, and with an eye to resourcing that at a borough level. Is there something missing? I mean, you've mentioned it about, but does there need to be something in there explicitly about using existing networks and relationships? And the paper notes that being clear to businesses from why they should engage doesn't really spell out the reasons, and that might be helpful to have some rationale for that. Okay. And then just the last bit about the VCSE engagement work. So that it just seems it's a little bit like a bolt-on to the business engagement activity, and that maybe a dedicated report could be brought along to the committee to on approach and progress, or maybe it goes to a different committee. So I think it's quite it's quite a big sector. I mean, in Calderdale there are thousands of jobs that are within the VCSE. We're working on in co-production with the VCSE, with organisations in the VCSE to create a strategic framework, and I just think maybe just a bit more acknowledgement and a bit more acknowledgement of how important maybe they are, across the sector, really. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Really good points. Just on the committees and the representation across the different boroughs and sectors as well. We are doing a bit of a mapping exercise around geographically, sector-wise, across the West Yorkshire Business Board, across the various committees to identify the gaps. And we've already talked to Calderdale about that. It's quite a significant gap. So we'll be looking at how do we, when we've got the next recruitment round, really push that out in your district to make sure we're getting it. And if there are any other gaps across the region.
But yeah, and hold us to it. Make us do the work as well.
Thank you. Sue, please.
Thank you. On the question in the paper, Sarah, about what methods work, I just thought I'd mention the work that we've done on the Top 100 Companies initiative in Kirklees, working with the council over the last 4 or 5 years. That's been a really effective collaborative approach to get to talk to some of the larger companies and that Top 100, as well as we've done spin-offs around SME versions and innovative businesses and those kind of things. So that's been a really good vehicle, and we've been in conversation with other neighbouring authorities about expanding that. I know Bradford have got one, so that is definitely a method that has worked for us, and we'd like to build on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Asma, please.
Just to add on the formal and informal mechanisms that are outlined there, I sit on the Leeds, I think Martin you do, the Leeds Leadership Chamber group, and it was highlighted that we could do with a representative from, I mean I wear various hats, so indirectly it was probably there representing you, but things like that. I think that if you could have a representative present at these Leeds Leadership Chamber events, the BIM Committee Chamber event, Western North Yorkshire Bradford Chamber events, please ask and I can let you have the dates, and then if it just makes that little bit of a difference because you're actually on the ground, and just on the informal mechanism as well, festivals, conferences, other events, absolutely great. We did an iftar corporate event last year, you may recall, where it was multi-faith attendance. The mayor did attend. We're hosting it again in March this year. It would be great to have West Yorkshire Combined Authority and private sector representation at that. I think all that makes a big difference because you're, again, in the heart of it all.
Thank you. Martin, please.
Yeah, so I was going to say exactly the same. I think the chamber and the chambers are a really great mechanism because they represent business pretty effectively, actually. And I know, looking at it's at the North Yorkshire and West Yorkshire Chamber, I don't know, but the leadership are looking at where they can add more value as well. So I think the time for a conversation about joining that up, but their network I think is quite extensive. The additional comment I was going to make was about, from a university perspective, we have a lot of external advisory boards, probably too many. And I think we've used those very effectively from a nexus perspective. Again, being very clear about what the remit is and how you choose the membership. But I was also going to say the question, and again, this is with my sort of commercial hat on, and one of the reasons why I probably didn't get involved in some of these things previously is what's in it for the individual and the business. And if you're running a startup business or part of a corporate, this is what's in it for that business and what's in it for you. And I think we need to think about that perspective, because to get a representative input, that's the challenge, I think. And again, I don't know how we're thinking about what representative looks like as well, because there's a lot of different dimensions of that in terms of sectors, size of business, diversity and all the rest of it. But that was the other thing I was just going to offer. But I'm very happy to have a follow-up conversation, Sarah. I've got quite a few other ideas, particularly, again, looking at what the university's planning to do over the next few years. Business engagement and how we do that is critical. So very happy to have a follow-up conversation.
That'd be really helpful. Thank you, Martin.
Carl, please.
Thank you, Chair. And it'd be useful, even at this stage, to have a visual as to the configuration and, and who's actually within some of those structures and some of the, as Sarah was saying, some of the groups that might be underrepresented or might need to feature more in some of the existing structures now, because it's a transition period. Every time I come to another meeting, there's always some new, thinking going on around shaping a new structure and a new engagement. And at this point in time, it's good to help us to better understand where we are now and what we might be going forward to help you with some suggestions. Could we have that quite soon without?
Yeah, absolutely. We can pull that together. ASAP.
Thank you. Thanks. No,
Thank you. Simon, please.
Just on the same as Asma's point, I think if the business desk are running the Yorkshire Business of the Awards, I think it's next month it's coming up. I don't know if Tracy's already there, but kind of joining up that existing network with what's going on there might be kind of an easy win to get a bit of gravitas behind.
Thank you. Really interesting comments. I suppose, Asma alluded to it earlier on, actually. So a part of this, when we get around to it properly, and we've got a version of this that we're all happy to sign up to. It's about us asking you and other members on other committees how we can empower, enable you to represent us at a lot of these events and functions and groups, because there are only so many of us in the combined authority as officers, and only so many places we can reach with the best will in the world before our private lives begin to fall apart. So, so together as one sort of big combined authority family, us then feeling empowered to represent that West Yorkshire brand and bringing that learning insights into these forums would be incredibly helpful. The other point on the VCE bit, we accept it does seem like it's a bit of a bolt-on now, but that's only because the thinking is very underdeveloped right now about what it is we're going to do and how we're going to do it. The very last thing we want to do is to duplicate or step on any toes unduly. We know there are a lot of fantastic networks and groups out there already doing great stuff. What we're trying to feel out is there a role at that regional level that we can play? And if there is, what is it? And how can we do that? So that's why it says just a paragraph or so in there. Hopefully, once the bandwidth is such that we're able to devote more attention to it, we'll develop that thinking a lot more. And the very final point, please, on the Mayor's Council. We hear you, the first, and many others have said, the focus on big businesses, and there's a risk that it might. So we hear that completely. The reassurance, I suppose, if there is one, is to say, I don't think, and Sarah might tell me if I'm wrong, what we are calling big business in West Yorkshire, I don't think there's one representative from that class, that group, in any of our groups at all. So that is an obvious gap that we have to fill. That is not to the detriment of any other arrangement we've got. It's just that we need to fill that gap because we don't have that relationship at all. And there are so many things that we could do in that space. Having said that, we are looking at what model will work, and whether it's a fixed group of people or it's a banner under which we do other things and bring people in as and when, depending on what we're talking about. So nothing is fixed. We're still working that through, but we are keen to fix that gap, and that's why we are looking at that. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Felix. Sarah, please.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because it's something that we've talked about, like within Calderdale. It's like we don't have the resources to have, like an account managed system where we have, somebody who can handle or work, very closely with the really big businesses, and it does feel a little bit ad hoc, really. And I think it's easier to have those relationships with the SMEs or the sort of medium-sized businesses, and I guess maybe that's because they want a bit more. Maybe need a bit more from us as well. So, and just a point on the sort of like the VCSE thing, it's interesting. I'm involved in a steering group that's NAVCA and the LGA are looking at how local authorities are working with voluntary sector organisations, but like LIOs. So it'd be interesting actually to sort of feed that back about then. It's like not just about how local authorities are working with sort of voluntary organisations and intermediate size sort of like voluntary organisations, but actually if there's a role for combined authorities in that, I'll feed that back and to see actually whether that's another piece of work that maybe NAVCA and the LGA might want to look at, because actually that is another level actually. So I'll feed that back as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Asma, please.
Just quickly, on the point that you made about whether there's a role for West Yorkshire Combined Authority and some of the organisations not treading on any toes, I think you're being too polite sometimes. I think you'll be surprised. People do want you there, and representation in terms of your input is welcomed. I'm aware of all of the networks that I'm with that is added value that you bring to the table. So please don't feel like you are treading on anybody's toes on that. The second point is around the council point, and I've raised my views that I am concerned about the bigger businesses because a lot of smaller businesses, private sector businesses, many around this table give up their time, and I wouldn't want to alienate anyone thinking it's about now the bigger slice. However, I go to the point that Martin made in terms of what's in it for us kind of scenario, and there could be a plus in this, in that the bigger businesses could form part of a supply chain where we as private sector and SME businesses could benefit as well, and it's finding that link, I think, that network that actually becomes a healthy synergy that probably is a win-win for everyone, but it's something that needs some more thought going into it, as you already are aware.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else wanting to come in on this item, so I'm going to turn to the recommendation, which is to note and offer feedback, which I think we've done very well. Thank you, everybody. So we'll move on to item 13, please, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just kind of start with a bit of why, and then we'll dig into sort of the three substantive topics of the paper today. So the focus today is on sort of a bit of inward investment, bit of trade activity, but just kind of starting with why. Mission 1 of the West Yorkshire Plan set out our ambition for a prosperous West Yorkshire. A big part of this is bringing in more and more sort of those foreign-owned companies that can drive productivity, bring good jobs with them, bring innovation with them, ultimately just bring new ways of doing things that other companies might not have seen before or might not have experienced before. And just to kind of hammer home this point is, according to ONS data, foreign-owned businesses are just under 70% more productive than domestic-owned businesses. So if we want to close this productivity gap, and we want to drive up productivity and all the associated economic benefits that come with that, such as real wage growth, foreign-owned businesses are going to be a key part of that. So in terms of the kind of three substantive topics, if you like, there are three things. There's key achievements, because it's always good to celebrate some success, even during kind of troubling economic times. there is what we've been doing in overseas countries so far in 2023, 2024, and then there is a little bit of a sort of a plan, if you like, a prospectus. So starting with some key achievements this year. So whilst inward investment inward investment inquiries are lower than we would have anticipated, and they were lower this year at this point than last year, just two things to note. One is that conversion success rates have been considerably higher than previously, and secondly, the type of companies that we're bringing across also feeds into something that DBT have also announced, which is a change in value. So the companies that we're working with and bringing over here they tend to be at the sort of larger end, they tend to be at the more innovative end. They're doing really, really cool stuff. So whilst inquiries are lower than we perhaps like, we are picking up activities to try to increase that. But the Department for Business and Trade, DBT, are also moving in this direction of focusing on really high value inquiries that are going to drive the UK economy, not just West Yorkshire, the UK economy into the next sort of decade or so, and hopefully we'll have a better decade than the one that has just been before us. So some of the things that we're doing in terms of driving up this activity are we're attending events domestically and internationally. We've had a recent programme called the Propel Programme, which is where we've partnered with DBT and the Health Innovation Yorkshire and Humber to deliver a programme for Indian health tech companies. And from that, we've had 2 companies taking up virtual membership in Nexus and a further 2 exploring options in and around the region. So in terms of the countries that we've perhaps focused on for this year, it's primarily been India, the United States, Canada, and the Nordics. This has been informed by the EY Attractiveness Survey, and we do try to follow, in terms of countries that we target, we try to follow where the data indicates there are good opportunities. So we've had 19 businesses that we've supported to invest in the region. This includes businesses that have expanded, retained and recruited more staff, as well as companies that are completely new to the region. And 42% of that investment has been outside of the Leeds district. To hand, I don't have the breakdown of by district, but if people are interested in that, I'm sure we can get it. But I think it's just to kind of say that whilst the economic times haven't been the most conducive to lots of foreign investment and lots of expansion, we have worked hard and will carry on working hard with partners to understand where these opportunities exist, whether it be with universities, whether it be with the Department for Business and Trade, whether it be with overseas contacts as well. Now, in terms of overseas activity for this year, in November 2023, the Mayor, accompanied by her business advisor, went over to North America for 5 days, visiting a range of cities across the US and Canada. This included 24 meetings with over 100 new contacts met. This was all about strengthening relationships with key cities and states across our key sectors. Just something that's worth saying is, with quite a lot of inward investment activity, it is a bit of a slow burn. You very rarely have a trade mission and then immediately have a load of successes that follow. That would obviously be great, and if anyone knows any companies that we can sort of coincidentally line up a trip to, let me know. But it is important to just understand that this is a bit of a slow burner. It does take time. So as well as the North America trip, the Mayor, the Chief Exec and the Director for Mass Transit visited Ireland to do a bit of a knowledge exchange on transportation and culture. And that also included a visit to the Guinness Enterprise Centre in Dublin to explore opportunities in the health and life sciences sector. Well, I've not been to the Guinness Enterprise Centre, but if they can support the health and life science ecosystem, then so be it. They can name themselves what they like. And then there was also an outbound mission to India, where we joined a DBT delegation to Mumbai and Bangalore Tech Summit. As well as the sort of more formal missions, if you like, we also attended a series of conferences such as Web Summit, UK Space Conference, Money 2020, and 2 of my colleagues are currently in Arab Health following the Mayor's successful visit to Arab Health this time last year. So that's sort of what we've done this time round. And in terms of what we're doing next time, what's listed here is it's worth saying there may be some tinkering depending on dates, depending on sort of human resource, if you like, and staff availability. But just to go through a few things. So we've mentioned today around venture capital. We're putting a lot of focus into how we can bring more money, more investment into the West Yorkshire region. this is going to be a key part of our West Yorkshire plan, a key part of the emerging economic strategy. And we have a great event just on our doorstep called Climb, which we'll be putting in a lot of resource to. So if people want to check out Climb 24, it is in early June, and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority will be there. In terms of the sort of more formal trade missions, if you like, we're considering two currently. One is a US trade mission, albeit to different parts of the United States. So we're looking at possibly Nashville and Houston, so in Tennessee and Texas respectively. This is with a big health and life sciences focus, and there is an opportunity to work with DBT on this. And there's also potentially another India trade mission, which is just building on the Mayor's successful visit to Mumbai and Bangalore in 2022. And we're looking at taking a business delegation to India next year. And once again, we'll focus it on specific trade shows, or if there is like a tech conference, for instance, we will try to make it as focused as we can. In terms of conferences, just to highlight a few, so Climb, for instance, I've referred to already. There is Sifted Summit in London, where it's to try to target that VC network. Most VCs in the UK, unfortunately, well, fortunately if you're in London, but unfortunately if you're trying to tap into that network. Across creative and digital, there's London Tech Week, there's Gamma Yo, and there's Mobile World Congress. Two of those are domestic, one is overseas. For health and life sciences, there's Health Europe in Amsterdam and Arab Health in Dubai. And then for advanced manufacturing, there's the Food and Drink Trends and Innovation Conference, Ignite Space, Smart Cities, and Farnborough International Air Show. But I think it's also worth saying, as well as me pointing out that inward investment ultimately takes time, and we have a lot of economic and political disruption this year that's scheduled. I think around half the world's up for re-election this year, which also doesn't lend itself to foreign direct investment. That ultimately these things cannot just be done as the combined authority. We do work closely with our partners in trying to understand where we can maximise value, where we can work together in terms of showcasing some of the great assets in our region to try to get companies over here. It is important that we work together on this. So thank you, Chair. And if anyone's got any questions, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tom. Carl, please.
Thanks, Tom. I think going back to the earlier presentation around the economic strategy, and I think Joe highlighted the role of the combined authority being an enabler. And, you know, it's a conversation we've had many times about the combined authorities' role in kind of creating a strategic framework and context. So those were examples or, you know, illustrations of the work that the combined authority itself is doing around international trade and investment. But I think it would be very useful to also have a reference and appreciation to what others are doing as well. Not only the chambers, but even you know, even within some of the kind of community-based spaces, we were at ASMA, myself and others, an MOU signing initiative between Western North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce and the state of Rawalpindi in Pakistan very recently. And, you know, that is one of, you know, the more recent proactive initiatives being undertaken at a local level. I've been involved in those things with other countries as well in the past, and it's been to a great frustration over the years that when we had UKTI and then DIT, the obsession was on the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, you know, at the short-sightedness, you know, and it took Brexit for us to realise there's a bigger world out there as well, even though some of those are very large economies. But, you know, we should have a kind of more holistic view to, you know, what potential there is to bring investment and trade from around the world. And there are also, then, we need to be cognizant of some of the structural hindrances to that, because previously the DIT used to have a subsidy called Passport to Import that contributed to those missions. That doesn't exist anymore. So the potential, so that's a really difficult problem now for people to actually participate in those missions, because so outside of the budget that we have here, how are we going to get more people to get involved in trade missions generally? So I think if we can kind of have a view and an eye and a thought process on that kind of wider holistic stuff, and then capture that within the strategy.
Yeah, thank you for that, Carl. And I think that kind of wider holistic approach is well worth having. We ultimately don't know everyone. We only have connections with certain geographies or certain people, and particularly on the DBT side, people change their jobs really quite frequently. So you end up with building connections in places where, as you say, you end up missing places essentially. So I think it kind of comes back to what I mentioned when I sort of summed up the paper, which is ultimately we can't do this alone, and it's important that we are all working together. And if there are other companies or other organisations doing or operating in this space, more than happy to work with people and figuring out how we can bring it all together.
Thank you. Sue, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. So 2 questions. One is it would be useful, I think, to see that split of the 19 inward investors across the 5 districts. There's a lot of interest in that, and particularly to see whether that figure outside Leeds is increasing over time. It would be good to see that, even if it's anonymised information about who they are. So that would be very welcome in future papers. And it was good to see PwC in Bradford in the news this week with their new officers. So that's obviously a big step forward there. And the second thing was I just wanted to welcome the approach we've had from Tom Hutchinson and Steph Oliver Beach in that spirit to reach out on the health front to look at the opportunities in the health innovation campus in Huddersfield, which ties in with that second point about the sector and the opportunities that are starting to land in the region. So yes, we're very up for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Yeah, thank you. And I think sort of Carl, you were sort of saying about the sort of, I think what you're saying ties into something I want to say about the sort of locality. Local knowledge is really critical to success. It's like what's in your area, and you have those sort of contact. I know that the trade and investment team had your team session in Coldale recently, which and met with our business team, which went down really well, was really positive, really well received. And so I suppose integrating those teams is really useful. And we had we've had some inward investment, not necessarily the big international stuff, but we had British Urban Film. I know Trace was aware of this. The British Urban Film Festival have relocated to Dean Clough in Halifax, which is up from Shoreditch. Which we thought we were quite happy about that. It's sort of one of the more sort of high profile ones for us, especially with our sort of year of culture at the moment. I had to get that in. Year of culture. The report notes. Yeah, I'll lose my position if I don't. If it's not minuted. The report notes that there's a 42% investment outside of Leeds, and it would be useful to have a geographical breakdown of that, and clearer on what's the right proportional split. Really, that's the only comment. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Martin, please.
Just quickly on the geographical splits, I'll make sure we can get those figures and we'll get them across.
I guess I've got a question about the role that universities have here, because I think universities play an absolutely critical role in terms of being a massive attractor, particularly of fast-growing startups or scaling companies, but also corporates as well. And I think we've seen that through Nexus, working closely with yourselves and particularly Leeds City Council. So I think we've attracted 20 international companies from 17 countries now as part of Nexus. But I'm really interested to say, how can you start to scale that? And that is a proposition across all of the universities here, and being complementary as well. And I think particularly with what you're doing in terms of building your new campus in Huddersfield as well, as an example. So I think there's an opportunity to really join this up and to create something. But the companies that I've had contact with which obviously is a limited number, 20 plus, nearly all of them will say that the university and having seamless access to talent, skills, research is a big part of that proposition. So I think that's, I suggest, Chair, that may be worth a separate workshop or a separate discussion, because I do think that's a key part, key vital part of the proposition here.
Thank you. I was just thinking that investment zones provides a great opportunity for us to try that on a kind of a defined sector focus and just to work through how that might work in reality, and then we can expand that potentially to other things.
Thank you. Felix, please.
Just a really minor point of caution, if I could. The team is fully aware the extent to which we need to make sure we are representative of our place. And so we completely take on board the point about sort of geographical splits and that will provide the information. The caution, though, please, is companies in the end go where they go. And so we do all we can and all of that. But it would be unfortunate if that then becomes, well, you've given us this and they are all in Bradford or they are all in whatever. We do everything we can to make sure we are as representative as possible. Leeds is the driver, so it is the big attractor, but the team is fully aware, and as you said, Councillor, the team was in Calderdale meeting with colleagues just in the last week or so, and we push as hard as we can. But 1 year, it might be that we have a lot of companies going to Wakefield or Bradford because that's where the economic wind is blowing for whatever reason. And another year, it might be somewhere else. So let's just ignore the noise and look at the trends. And I think that will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee, please.
Just on the spirit of Carl's point, it's probably worth highlighting that Innovate UK has a global programme. It's focused on helping businesses to access external markets more than inward investment. But we have missions to Singapore, Canada, Australia, China, usually around specific themes. So there's one at the moment to Singapore around clean tech. And we also have the Global Incubator Programme as well. So there's things that we're doing that we can facilitate as well and bring into the mix.
Staying in line with the trend, then is it possible to Jamaica to the rum factories as well? Then?
I would love to do that.
It's an interesting idea. Great. Does anybody else want to come in on this item, please?
What, on drinks?
Yeah.
I could do a shout out from Murphy's.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not.
Yeah. Okay, shall we agree the recommendations on this item? And before I go on to everybody's drinks items, move on to the last item, please. Item 14, please.
Thanks, Chair. So the paper outlines 4 strategic events and plans for their delivery in 2024. So it's UK Reef, Convention of the North, Climb 24 and the West Yorkshire Innovation Festival. All of the events, as we've mentioned, provide an opportunity to showcase West Yorkshire and its strengths, and Climb, that Tom mentioned, in particular, is a significant opportunity to welcome investors into the region while discussing cross-cutting themes like sustainability and future talent. So really like to take this opportunity to ask the committee for any feedback, any experiences that you've had of the events, or suggestions, best practice for delivery, and how you might be able to get involved in the development of the events as well.
Thank you, Louise. Does anybody want to come in on this item, please? Sue, please.
Yeah, very quickly. Thanks, Louise, because following the mention of Climb 24 at the innovation meeting the other week, our enterprise team is very interested in getting involved with that with some of our enterprising students. So if there's opportunities to do that, yes, please. And clearly we have had a very good experience with the Innovation Festival and with UK Reef as well. So supportive of continued engagement in all that. Thanks.
Thank you. Asma, please.
I was contacted by Bolu, who's looking at putting together a diverse panel from a legal sector perspective, and is asked me if I could be on that, and I've made some recommendations of other women as well. So I think, and some judges, I think that would be a great addition that he's thought of. So I think it's already been kind of discussed as to what would work. So just putting it on your radar that that's something Bolu's come up with, which is a great idea. Climb 24.
Thank you. Parvinder, please.
Thank you, Chair. Between your paper, Thomas, and Louise, you stimulated a thought which may not be fully formed, but I'll give it a go. The international trade and events, regional events that you're putting on, I experienced last summer by pure accident that the region had attracted a national conference which was hosted in Leeds, and it was the Bread Makers Federation, and they were talking about at their conference post-Brexit about the shared challenges of sustainability, talent pipeline, and the inequality challenge. And I think just by pure chance and coincidence, I was asked, they came on a weekend, I was asked to go and speak with them via the combined authority about the skills aspect and the skills gap. That's led to us working with the Bread Makers Federation to develop a national standard for apprenticeships specifically for their industry. I only had that meeting on Monday actually, so come back to your point, it takes a while for these things to happen. But coming back to Felix's point that Leeds is a hub and Bradford and Wakefield as being key cities, how do we attract more of these opportunities? So it's great going international, it's great putting a load of effort into putting on our own events, but how do we leverage and bring more national conferences to the region, of federations and bodies to the region, and because they're all talking about the same challenges, productivity or employment or skills or sustainability, and we showcase key people from the region who are experts in that space to maybe give them a stimulated thought or answer or be part of a combination of the two. So I just wonder, there's something that is maybe perhaps a little bit low hanging than the hard work of doing our own events and going overseas. Just thought.
Thank you. I think it's worth saying that just to put a Leeds focus on it, Leeds is one of the biggest centres in the country for holding conferences. I know Leeds doesn't have a conference centre like some others, or a dedicated conference centre the way some other places do, but it's certainly Leeds is a very big centre for conferences, and it's something we're looking at developing our sort of based on UK Reef's first 2 years down by the canal at Leeds, looking at increasing our capacity to hold events in Leeds, and it's certainly something that we, like I say, UK Reef has really, I think, opened both our eyes and other people's eyes to what you can do in this part of the world in terms of conferences. Somebody else want to come in, please? Simon, please.
Just on that point, really, I'm not aware of anywhere in our region that probably compares conference centre-wise to anything that we'd normally go to. So there's some great summits that we go down in London, Energy Innovation Summit, it was fantastic last year, but we don't really have the facilities up here that I'm aware of to host those kind of events. So yes, I think there are opportunities, but it's finding the right space. I tried to convince the guy that runs the Energy Innovation Summit to come to Leeds, but it's finding the venue is one of the real dramas for these kind of big events.
Thank you. Somebody else want to come in on this item, please? Lee, please.
Just to say that there's obviously a standing offer from Innovate UK to get involved in local events and to help support them. Innovation Festival and others more than happy to get involved. I think on that point there about how you get those, I think those bigger events, I think it's probably right. It's the availability of venues. Even some of the events that I've organised in the region, it's not always easy to get the venue you really want that's going to tick all the boxes. There's nearly always some sort of compromise that you have to engage with.
Thank you. Palvinder, please.
I just think there's a sweet spot. There's a big summits which are always going to be a challenge, which are in London, or there is the kind of large scale federations and groups where they're in the hundreds and not perhaps in the thousands, but they employ hundreds and thousands. And that's where I think the sweet spot is. So we're not looking for something that is huge, because we're not going to be able to build a space and infrastructure for that straight away. But I think Leeds has got, and the West Yorkshire region has got, a sweet spot to be able to attract national organisations who don't potentially have the natural capitals because of their skill, of the connectivity and the political connectivity. So if we can package a political connectivity, an employer-based connectivity, a skills-based connectivity, because they're all talking about sustainability, skills, and politics in a sense, I think that could be quite an attractive offer. And I think it would be worth exploring, because they came here by pure accident. We don't have a large brand, I don't believe, of bread makers in. I don't think we don't have a Hovis and a Warburtons in West Yorkshire, but they still chose Leeds over Manchester. So it may be worth speaking to them, and it's not that they're going to come and build a factory here, but they could do. They could do.
Faith, please.
I suppose just to try to maybe bring this one in, we would get the Vista Economy Partnership that's just been set up to have a look at this and see if there's any scope at all. So we'll see where that goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Does somebody else want to come in on this item, please? I don't see anybody, so I'm going to look at the recommendations, which are to provide feedback and offer suggestions, which I think we have done. So if everybody's happy with that, I shall bring the meeting to a close. Thank you, everybody. We've got through a lot this afternoon. Thank you.